Today you will hear the unbelievable testimony of Daniel Rahman, a simple carpenter from a hidden village in Iran who saw his faith tested in the most brutal way imaginable. Imprisoned for secretly worshiping Christ, he and 6 brothers were sentenced to die burned alive before the entire village. But when the fire was lit, something supernatural happened. The flames surrounded their bodies but did not touch them. And before soldiers, villagers, and enemies, another man appeared inside the fire. The impossible became real, and what was supposed to be the end turned into one of the greatest testimonies of the living presence of God in our time. Get ready, because what you are about to see defies logic, science, and fear. And to begin, make sure you are subscribed, like the video, and tell me where you are watching from, because this story is going to move you.
I grew up hearing that faith could move mountains, but I never imagined it could also walk through fire. My name is Daniel Rahman, and before everything happened, I was just a carpenter. I worked in silence, shaping wood with my own hands, believing that if I was good at what I did and discreet about my faith, no one would notice what I carried in my heart. But in that small village hidden among the mountains of Iran, even the whisper of a prayer could become a sentence. And still, I chose to pray. I chose to continue, because inside me there was something that could not be extinguished, not by fear, nor by law, nor by the threats already whispered around the corners. Every night, when the sun disappeared and the desert dust began to settle, I walked through the narrow alleys in silence, my heart racing, hiding under my cloak a small piece of paper with words copied from the gospel. Sometimes the moon was the only witness to our gatherings. There were 7 of us, 7 people united by something the world could not understand. We met in damp basements lit by a single flickering candle. The air smelled of dust and wet wood, and every breath came with a risk. But it was there, in that closeness, that I felt the presence of God more alive than ever. The old and worn pages we read seemed to gain a voice, and the name of Jesus echoed through the clay walls like a sacred secret. That week, however, something felt different. The village was strange, quieter, heavier. There were suspicious glances, hurried footsteps, doors closing before I could even get close. Speaking about faith was already dangerous, but now even breathing felt like defiance. Rumors spread that the army was hunting converts, and many had vanished without a trace. Even so, my heart insisted on returning. I could not stay away, because hiding faith is like suffocating your own soul, and I already knew what it was like to live without air. That night the darkness felt alive. The wind whispered between the houses, lifting grains of sand that hit the windows like fingers begging to come in. I walked quickly to the basement where we always gathered. Layla was already there, sitting with a calm, steady gaze. In her hands she held a small crumpled piece of paper with the verse I already knew by heart. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Her words trembled, but her faith did not. When she lifted her eyes, I realized that something inside her already knew the time for hiding was over. I still remember the feeling of that moment, the sound of low voices, the smell of burning wax, the wood creaking beneath our feet. Every detail seemed charged with meaning. With each prayer, I felt as if we were surrounded by something invisible, a mix of fear and divine presence, the fear of being discovered, and the presence that kept us from stopping. It's hard to explain, but it was as if the Holy Spirit had prepared us for what was coming, even though our minds still tried to deny it. Suddenly, silence, a silence so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. That's when I heard the first sound, a dry knock on the door, short and strong. I froze. Layla closed her eyes. No one moved. Then came the second knock, louder, more violent. And then, the sound of boots dragging through the sand outside. In that moment, I realized they knew. They had found us. The air grew heavy, almost unbreathable. Fear has a smell, and at that hour it smelled like dust and cold sweat. I felt my hands shaking, but I couldn't move. It was as if an invisible force held me upright, keeping me from collapsing. Then the door exploded. The wood splintered, and the basement was filled with screams. Armed soldiers stormed the small space, kicking over the candles, pointing their guns. calling us traitors. The commander, a tall man with hard, empty eyes, was the last to enter. He looked at me like a predator staring at trapped prey. And with a cold voice, he said, "Let's see if your Jesus will save you tonight." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I just closed my eyes and prayed for strength. Layla was dragged away by force. Reza tried to resist and was struck down. And I remained still, not out of courage, but because I didn't know what else to do. It was as if the whole world had stopped, and all that was left was the sound of fear itself. We were pushed outside like animals, our hands tied with thick, rough ropes, our faces pressed against the cold ground. Outside, the wind cut through our skin, lifting desert dust that mixed with the metallic taste of blood. The truck was parked just ahead, old, rusty, rumbling with the engine running. The sound of the motor was the omen of something I didn't yet understand, but my heart already knew. That journey had no return. Inside the truck, piled on top of one another, no one spoke. Only the rattling of metal and the growl of the engine could be heard. The moon lit the dirt road and shadows danced across tense faces. Layla, her face resting against the wood, began to sing softly, almost in a whisper, "Even in the fire, you are near." The melody was so gentle it seemed a miracle in itself. Each note seemed to defy fear. I leaned my head back and tried to listen, like someone clinging to the last thread of hope. And then, in the midst of that darkness, I realized that my soul was not silent. It was praying, without words, without a voice, just a cry trapped in my heart. "Lord, if it is my time, may I not deny your name." When the truck stopped, the engine's sound ceased, and the silence returned. The commander shouted an order, and the soldiers flung open the back doors with a bang. Moonlight flooded the dark interior, revealing our faces covered in dust and fear. We were shoved out. The ground was dry, hard, covered in ash. And ahead, there was a pit ablaze. The fire rose high, roaring like a living beast, illuminating the night. The heat was so intense you could feel your skin burning, even meters away. The villagers were there, men, women, children, some with their eyes covered, others with trembling hands holding their children. No one spoke. No one breathed. The commander raised his voice and announced proudly, "Let this serve as an example. Here there is only one truth, and whoever challenges that truth will face the fire." I looked around. I saw Layla kneeling, her eyes closed and her lips moving in prayer. I saw Elias staring at the fire without blinking. I saw Reza weeping silently, and I realized there was no more room for doubt. The faith we carry is only real when nothing else remains. The ground seemed to pulse beneath my feet. The sound of the flames mingled with the beating of my heart. The smell of burning oil and wood filled the air, making each breath a vivid memory. The commander stepped forward and shouted the order that would change everything. "Remove the moorings, throw them on the bonfire." The ropes were cut, not as a sign of compassion, but to facilitate the act. A soldier pushed me hard and I staggered toward the fire. I felt the heat hit my face like a living wave. Instinct made me close my eyes and wait for the pain. But the pain never came. When I opened my eyes, the impossible was before me. Fire surrounded me, but it didn't burn me. Flames danced around me, touching the ground, the air, but not my body. I felt the heat, yes, but it was a different kind of heat, gentle like the morning sun touching my face. My feet were firm, my whole body intact. Layla was beside me, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. She whispered, "He is here." I followed her gaze, and then I saw him. In the center of the fire, a figure, a man. His eyes were light. His face, peace. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Just looking at him, everything inside me fell silent. It was as if the very air knelt before him. It was Jesus. The fire lost its sound. The wind stopped, and the world for a moment fell silent. The soldiers retreated. The villagers wept. Some knelt. I looked at my hands. There were no burns, no ashes, no pain. Only life. Life amidst the flames. Layla raised her hands and cried, "My Lord, you have come." And in that instant I understood. It wasn't the fire that surrounded us, it was him. From that point on, nothing would ever be the same. The fire bowed before him. The flames that should have consumed us now seemed to tremble as if paying reverence. I couldn't take my eyes off the presence walking among us. Jesus was there, and all fear, despair, and pain simply vanished. Outside, an absolute silence fell. The crowd, once noisy and cruel, now seemed paralyzed. No one knew what to do. Some covered their faces, others fell to their knees, unable to comprehend what they saw. Suddenly I heard Commander Farid's desperate voice break the silence. He was shouting, ordering the soldiers to put out the fire, but no one moved. His voice trembled, and for the first time that man, so used to being obeyed, no longer had authority. Fear had shifted. Now it wasn't ours, it was theirs. The soldiers looked at each other, pale, with wide eyes, unable to approach. One of them tried to take a step, but stumbled and fell to his knees, as if an invisible force prevented him from going any further. The fire began to slowly die down, and a light breeze blew, scattering the smoke in the air. That wind carried something different, a gentle fragrance, like the scent of life after the rain. I felt the heat dissipate, and when I looked around, I realized that none of us had been burned. Our clothes were intact, our faces clean, and there wasn't even a trace of smoke on our bodies. The flames had surrendered to the Creator. When we emerged from the pit, the ground was still warm, but our steps were firm. Each step sounded like a silent declaration of victory. The people recoiled, terrified, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. I saw mothers clutching their children to their chests, men covering their faces, and even soldiers weeping silently. It was as if everyone had witnessed the impossible unfold before their very eyes. And the impossible had a name. I looked at Farid. He was still standing there, holding the gun with trembling hands. His expression was that of someone who had seen his own world crumble. His eyes, which had previously overflowed with rage, now seemed empty, filled with something I could only call holy terror. For a moment he tried to raise the gun towards me. The muzzle of the rifle wobbled, but the tremor was so intense that he couldn't aim. I stepped forward, not arrogantly, but with a peace that didn't come from within. The sound of my own voice surprised me when I said calmly, "You saw what we saw." He lowered his head, unable to look me in the eye. Those words weren't a threat. They were a statement of fact. He had witnessed something no man could deny. The fire didn't consume us because the God he thought didn't exist was present. Power had changed hands. Not to us, but to the one who had always been in control. For a few seconds, silence reigned. The people looked at me as if expecting me to say something more. But what can one say after witnessing the impossible? There was no speech, no explanation, only the certainty that something supernatural had happened. I could feel the spirit hovering in the air, transforming that field of death into a living altar. But human nature is weak, and pride does not die easily. Farid, overcome with shame and anger at having lost control in front of the entire village, shouted again, "Arrest them! Arrest them now! Tomorrow you will see the end." Her words echoed, but seemed empty. The soldiers hesitated, lacking the courage to approach. Some looked at the ground, others pretended not to hear. Even so, under threat of punishment, 2 of them took a step forward, staggering. We were surrounded again, not with force, but with fear. I didn't resist. Nobody resisted. Layla looked at me and whispered, "Leave it. What needed to be done has already been done." As we were being led away, I heard a woman shout from the crowd, "They are men of God. You saw what I saw." But no one dared to intervene. The crowd was now divided between fear and faith. We were thrown into a covered cart and taken to the military post, a stone and iron building on the edge of the village. The journey was silent. I felt my heart calm, as if an invisible peace enveloped me. It was as if the very air inside that cart had changed. Even chained, I knew we were free. When we arrived, we were thrown into a cold, damp cell. The floor was stone, and water dripped from the walls, forming small puddles that reflected the dim light of the lamp hanging outside. The smell was of mold and rust. I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the cold wall, and closed my eyes. Strange as it may seem, all I felt was gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, for having seen what I saw, and for knowing that nothing, Absolutely nothing could separate us from the presence of Christ. No guard spoke. The corridor was immersed in an almost supernatural silence. The sound of drops falling to the floor was the only thing that broke the monotony. I noticed footsteps from time to time, but no one's gaze turned towards the inside of the cell. It was as if even they were afraid to approach. And perhaps they were. The hours passed slowly and the cold seeped into my bones. My body ached, but my spirit was awake. Suddenly, a soft sound. A gentle creaking, like a boot dragging. I looked up and saw one of the young guards, his face shrouded in shadow. He approached the railings, looked around to make sure no one was watching him, and with a swift gesture, made the sign of the cross. He didn't say a word, just that simple, almost imperceptible movement, which spoke louder than 1,000 sermons. At that moment I understood that God was still at work. He was there, even in that dark hallway. The fire had gone out, but the flame continued to burn within each of us. Layla began to pray softly. A short, sincere prayer that seemed to touch the prison walls. Then Miriam began to sing an old hymn, and soon, everyone joined in. The melody echoed softly, rising through the corridor and mingling with the sound of dripping water. No soldier ordered us to be quiet. No one dared to interrupt. It was as if that cell had transformed into a temple. I closed my eyes and began to pray as well. I asked for strength, I asked for peace, and I asked that wherever our family members were, God would protect them. Gradually, exhaustion took over. My head grew heavy and I fell asleep with the song still echoing in the back of my mind. In the dream, I was home again. The wooden table I had built myself was set, and my parents were there, smiling like in the old days. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. For a moment, everything seemed normal, until I perceived a presence behind them. It was him. Jesus was standing, with his hands on my parents' shoulders, looking at me with that same look of peace I had seen in the fire. There were no words, only that silence that communicates everything. When I woke up, Layla was leaning against the wall looking at me. She whispered in a weak but firm voice, "I dreamed too. I dreamed about my children. They were protected." I knew it wasn't a coincidence. It was God answering, showing that even separated, even imprisoned, he was taking care of ours. The following hours were different. The cold no longer bothered us so much. The fear was gone. In its place there was a certainty. No matter where we were, true freedom was already ours. Layla started singing again, and I joined her. Our bare feet touched the wet ground, but our souls were light. The night seemed eternal, but within that small space, time lost its meaning. With each prayer, with each word spoken in faith, something invisible moved. It wasn't a fleeting emotion, it was a profound conviction. The certainty that the same God who had been with us in the flames was now sitting with us in the darkness. And while the world slept, we lived what many would call madness, a peace that made no sense. The silent presence of God filled every corner of that prison, and I understood that the true miracle was not surviving the fire. The true miracle was continuing to feel the warmth of faith even when everything around seemed cold and dead. At that moment, I understood something I've never forgotten. The body may be imprisoned, but the spirit is free. And that's how the night passed, between songs, dreams, and the sacred silence of those who have already seen the impossible and no longer need proof. Dawn arrived heavily, as if the sky itself were afraid to open its eyes to what was about to happen. The chill of the early morning still cut through the air, and the distant sound of soldiers' footsteps echoed through the stone corridors. I had barely slept. No one had. We spent the entire night praying silently, and even without understanding what was to come, we knew that God had not finished what he had begun. When the cell doors opened, my heart pounded. The guard didn't say a word. He only pointed outside. I walked with the other 6, feeling the damp ground beneath my bare feet. The air seemed different, denser, as if time itself were holding its breath. As I went outside, I saw the courtyard packed. Men, women, children. The whole village had returned. Some were standing, others kneeling, but they all had the same look. Fear mixed with something I could only call hope. The sound of murmurs was like the wind sweeping through a wheat field. It trembled, it swayed, but it never stopped. In the center, Commander Farid. He seemed unrecognizable. His pale face, the deep dark circles under his eyes, his unkempt beard. He was the same man who had shouted arrogantly the night before, but now he looked like the portrait of someone who hadn't slept since he saw the fire bow before Christ. He tried to disguise the weakness in his voice when he shouted, "The fire didn't kill them? Then we'll see if the stones can." For a second, I felt sorry for him. It was like watching someone fight against something that cannot be defeated. Even so, he maintained his composure, trying to show strength before the people. The soldiers reluctantly picked up stones from the ground. I could see the trembling in their hands. Some couldn't even look at us. One of them, the youngest, had tears in his eyes. The same young man who had silently made the sign of the cross in the cell, Samir. Our eyes met for an instant, and in that brief second, I knew he didn't want to be there. Farid picked up a large stone, raised his arm, and threw it forcefully. Everything happened slowly. I saw the stone come spinning through the air, illuminated by the first ray of sunlight. I felt my heart stop, and then simply, it stopped. It floated before us for a fraction of a second, as if it had struck an invisible wall, and then fell to the ground with a dry, light sound, as if it had lost its weight. A cry echoed. Not of pain, but of astonishment. The people recoiled. The soldiers exchanged glances, and silence fell like a heavy cloak over everyone. Farid, stunned, picked up another stone and threw it with even more force. The same thing happened. It stopped in midair, motionless, and fell slowly. He shouted, furious, "Shoot, everyone now!" And then dozens of stones were thrown. I saw hands moving, the stones flying like swarms of bees, but none touched us. They all stopped a few meters away, floating for a moment before falling to the ground. The sound of the stones falling one after another was like the sound of a defeated army. The ground was covered with them, but not a single one even scratched us. The air began to vibrate. I can't explain it. It was as if something invisible had descended from the sky, filling everything. The sunlight intensified, becoming golden, almost white, and a beam pierced the clouds, falling directly upon us. I felt the heat, but it was the same heat I felt inside the fire. A heat of presence, not of destruction. My hands, still bound with thick ropes, began to tingle. And then, the ropes simply loosened. They fell, as if they had lost the right to bind me. I looked around and saw the same thing happening to the others. Layla raised her arms to the sky, tears streaming down her face, and began to sing. That voice, I'll never forget it. It was soft, yet strong enough to pierce any silence. I joined her, and soon all 7 of us began to sing. It wasn't a planned song, it was praise that sprang from within, the kind of worship that doesn't depend on instruments or lyrics, only on the certainty that the impossible was happening before everyone's eyes. The people began to weep. I saw women fall to their knees, men covering their faces with their hands. Children, who had previously hidden behind their parents, now gazed in wonder, as if they were witnessing the very heavens opening. The soldiers, one by one, began to drop their weapons. The sound of iron striking the ground mingled with the chanting that echoed ever louder. And then something even more astonishing happened. Farid himself, the one who had condemned us, fell to his knees. He tried to resist, but it was as if something was pushing him. His legs trembled, his body bent, his face turned to the ground. The man who had previously shouted orders was now crying, tears streaming down into the dust. I heard his voice, weak and hoarse, repeating in English, "Jesus is real, Jesus is real." Those words cut through the air like a sword. He didn't speak them in Persian, nor in the language of authority. He spoke them in the language of faith, the language of one who surrenders. And in that instant, human power crumbled. There were no more commanders, no prisoners, no spectators. There was only a presence that encompassed everything and everyone. The light grew brighter, almost blinding. I couldn't see anything but brightness. The ground seemed to tremble, but it was as if the universe itself was breathing along with us. I felt a profound peace, the same peace I felt when I saw Jesus in the fire. And within that peace I heard something. Not an external sound, but a voice that spoke directly to my heart. I am here. It was quick, but it was real. As the light began to fade, I looked around. Everyone was kneeling. The entire village. No one remained standing. not even the soldiers. It was as if God had personally descended to show that his power cannot be extinguished, that faith cannot be silenced. Layla was still singing, her eyes closed, her hands raised. Her voice was now joined by dozens of others from the crowd. Men and women began to sing too, without understanding the lyrics but feeling the truth. The air was heavy, and each breath seemed like a miracle. Farid tried to get up. He staggered, stumbled, and fell again. He wept uncontrollably, repeating the same words like a man broken by his own revelation. Soldier. Samir approached slowly, his eyes brimming with tears. He dropped his rifle to the ground and knelt down as well. No one ordered him to. No one encouraged him. It was spontaneous, pure, genuine. I saw something change in him at that moment. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The singing spread until the entire courtyard became one sound, one heart. I looked at the sky and it seemed different, bluer, more open. The light that enveloped us didn't just come from the sun. It was something deeper, something that illuminated from within. The stones were still on the ground, untouched, and the fire from the previous day was now just cold ash. But inside me, something burned. It wasn't fear. It wasn't euphoria. It was something beyond words, the certainty that I had witnessed the very power of the living God. As we sang, the wind began to blow. A gentle wind that stirred up the dust and made the light seem to dance. The sound of our voices mingled with the sound of the wind, and I thought, perhaps the sky has decided to sing with us. For a moment, everything stopped. Time, sound, air. It was as if the whole world held its breath. And then suddenly the beam of light that enveloped us began to rise, returning to the sky. Slowly, the clouds closed in, and the glow dissipated. We stood there, silent, breathless, our hearts pounding. No one knew what to say. The entire village was on its knees, and the courtyard, once a place of execution, now resembled a temple. I looked around and saw faces washed with tears, hands raised, eyes closed. The sound of chains on the ground reminded me that we were prisoners, but nothing within me felt captive. Farid was still kneeling, his shoulders trembling. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. When he finally managed to, it was only a whisper. Stop. Please stop. They are not ordinary. But no one stopped. Because it was no longer us singing. It was the Spirit of God in every voice, in every tear, in every breath. I felt an urge to kneel as well. And I did. I touched the ground and closed my eyes. Dust clung to my fingers, but at that moment it felt like gold. His presence was still there, as real as the fire of the previous night. And within me, a phrase formed, simple but powerful. He's still here. We stayed like that for a while. I can't measure it. Minutes, maybe hours. Nobody moved. The world had stopped to witness the impossible, and I knew. From that day on, nothing would ever be the same.
And if you've made it this far, it's because what you've just heard has touched something within you. This testimony from Daniel Rahman is not just a story about fire, prison, and miracles. It's a living reminder that the presence of God knows no boundaries, neither fear nor time. When the world tries to extinguish faith, it is at that moment that heaven manifests itself with the greatest force. Daniel survived the fire, but the true miracle was what happened within him. The certainty that Jesus is present, even in the most intense flames of life. If this story has ignited your faith, check now if you are already subscribed to the channel, because here we share testimonies that prove God's power and mercy in our time. Leave a like. This helps this message reach even more people who need to remember that the impossible still happens. And I want to ask you something special. If this story touched your heart, write it in the comments below. I love Jesus. That way I'll know that you're part of this faith community that doesn't stay silent, that continues to believe, even when everything seems lost. And pay attention, don't miss the next video that is now appearing on your screen. It's a story that will send chills down your spine. The true testimony of a Muslim man who was miraculously saved by Jesus at the exact moment he was about to be hanged, and decided to leave Islam to follow Christ. Prepare your heart, because what comes next will challenge everything you believe about faith, redemption, and grace. Click now and continue this journey with us. May God bless you mightily, and never forget. Even in the fire, he is still there.